Unpacking Mormonism is a subsidiary of Daisy Girl Communications, LLC. All content herein is intended for educational purposes only and does not replace the advice or counsel of your personal care provider. So, I really hate pilot episodes of pretty much everything. Like, one of my favorite television shows is Friends and Big Bang Theory, and I did not like either of their pilot episodes, and then things were great after that. So, yeah, I feel like as we went back through and listened to this, we were like, man, our introductions were really long. And so we kind of wanted to come back and...
Enjoyable. Please enjoy them. But yes, they were long.
Enjoyable but long. Hopefully enjoyable. So anyway, but they were really long. And so we wanted to just give you a real quick, what is Unpacking Mormonism about? What do you have to look forward to?
So I think that's the big question, right? What is this podcast about? And so just as a upfront, right away, is this something I want to be a part of? Really, the answer to that question is what happens now? So lots of us go through trauma. Lots of us go through different things. In this case, we're focused specifically on Mormonism or religious trauma. You find yourself in a situation where you don't know what to do. Either there's questions about your religion, or things have come up that you're like, maybe I don't know how to deal with this, or a family member is deciding to leave your religion. You just don't know what to do. We're hoping that we can share tools that will help you better understand your body, better understand the way things that work, and where can I go with this information that I have.
Yeah, absolutely. I think everybody is on a different journey or path. I know that's almost cliche in my field of mental health, is that we're all on a different journey. But yeah, I think that there's a lot of resources out there that give a lot of information about, historical claims and hearing stories and those types of things. And they do a great job. We really want to focus on how do we take where we are right now and how do we move forward in a manner that works well for us and leads us to a place of healing and understanding. We hope to be able to give tools and insights in how to interact with the community that you've left, as long as it's healthy for you, how to identify if something is healthy for you, those types of things. And
right.
So
that's
really our goal.
Yeah, healthy bridges. Let's get from where you are to where you want to be, and let's do it in a healthy way, not just pushing through or forgetting stuff or any of that. Let's build a healthy bridge.
Yeah, and Mason, you had said something earlier that I found really valuable. Our goal is to take our listeners from surviving to thriving. Welcome to Unpacking Mormonism. I'm your host, Sarah Westbrook, joined today with my husband, who is very sexy.
Hey, that's me, Mason Westbrook.
Great. So we wanted to just kind of introduce our podcast today as our episode 1, so that way you know what we're all about. So first, I think it's important for us to just make introductions as to who your hosts are. So I'm Sarah Westbrook. My husband, Mason Westbrook, will introduce himself here in a minute, and then we're going to kind of introduce us as a couple. And then we're going to talk about what the podcast is about, what we're hoping to gain, who we are, who we aren't, and process that a little bit. I love that word process. I'm going to be using it a lot in this podcast because I'm a licensed professional counselor. And that is one of my favorite words. So who am I? I was born and raised Mormon. I love to joke that my parents were BYU-I-doers. My dad is from LA, California, and my mom is from upstate New York. My mom's actually an Air Force brat, so she traveled all over mostly the East Coast, I believe, in her childhood. But they met at BYU, and Dad popped the question, and Mom said yes, and I was born like 10 months later in true Mormon fashion. Might have been a little bit less. Let's see, they got married in April, and I was born in March the following year.
So that's 11 months.
Just 11 months. Bad. No big deal. Yeah, we gave him a little extra.
They caught that 1 year mark. It's okay.
Right? So in the normal, or what I'm going to say is normal of the time. So in the early 80s and into the 90s, my parents were very much, they fit that mold of Mormonism. So my mom was a stay-at-home mom. And she worked to earn extra money, like babysitting other people's kids. She was a seamstress, so she would sew and whatnot. But when I was 2 years old, my dad finished his degree in teaching, and we moved to Snowflake, Arizona. And my dad taught at Taylor Elementary School. And I kind of chuckle about Snowflake. People ask me all the time, so would you move back? And my answer is, oh, hell no. And when people say, why, what's the matter?
Not with that kind of language.
Right? Whew, that would be bad. So when people ask me, well, why wouldn't you move back to Snowflake? It's a great place. And by people, I mean your siblings, Mason. Snowflake is a great place. It's a good place to raise a family. They've, a community, lots and lots of Mormons. When I was growing up there, I want to say that the statistic was something like over 80% of the families were active Orthodox Mormons. I call Snowflake the Mormon Bubbleville because it has that high intensity Mormon. Everybody in my community that I knew of were Mormon. And if you weren't Mormon, Mormons were so prolific in our community that I just assumed you were Mormon from the time I was itty bitty. And so one of the things that's been really interesting is I'm writing my book, and my content editor will send me these messages like, how did you guys get away with saying a prayer in the middle of class? And I have to chuckle. And the reason is because I was born and raised, well, not born in Snowflake, but I was raised in Snowflake. And so all of my school teachers, or the majority of my school teachers, were Mormon. My church leaders obviously were Mormon. The people at the grocery store were Mormon. Like, everybody was Mormon, which also is a better network of spies than the CIA could ever produce, because everybody knew everybody else and was into everybody's business. And so, yeah, I will never move back to Snowflake. For one, I kind of killed my reputation there when I was 16. And for two, after being in the military, or following you, Mason, in the military for the last 20 years, I just don't think my brain can handle that type of small town. So growing up, I would say the population of Snowflake was probably somewhere around 5,000 or 6,000. Population of Taylor at the time, I think, was maybe, 3,000. So maybe 8,000 people is all, and everybody knew everybody. And there was a lot of Mormon there.
Fun times.
Yeah, so much fun. All right, so a little bit more about us. Mason and I got married in the Mesa, Arizona temple in June of 1999, which means we've been married for 23 years. It has felt like an eternity.
Ouch.
I know, right? Most of the time it's been good. It actually feels more like it's gone by really, really fast.
In some ways, absolutely.
Yeah. And other times it's gone by
like that moment of silence. That was like it was like a 12-year piece of silence. Like, am I supposed to say something here? I don't know.
So what I hear you saying is that the first 19 to 20 years of our marriage went by in a blink of an eye for you. In the last 3, since I've stepped away from Mormonism, it's been like 60.
Stuck in molasses.
That's awesome. Alrighty. So for the first decade of our marriage, I also did the stay-at-home mom gig. I struggled with some infertility and whatnot. So our oldest 2 children are adopted. And then medical science advanced, and with a lot of help from a lot of doctors, we were able to have 3 biological children. And then we said we were done. And then we adopted 2 more. So we have a total of 7 children. And so in those early years, I was never good at the stay-at-home mom thing. Like, I feel like I did a really good job of rocking all the duties of doing it. And there were parts of it that I really enjoyed. But I love learning. I'm kind of addicted to learning new things. So I'm a lifelong learner. And so I did I started my degree in behavioral health. And the reason I did that was because our second son, Brig, who we adopted. We brought him home from the hospital when he was 3 or 4 days old. And within a couple of weeks, I knew that something was very different about that child. And by the time he was 5, it was right before his 5th birthday, Brig was diagnosed with psychosis. And so when I went back to school, I was very interested in behavioral health because I would take him to the doctor and the doctors would tell me that the reason he was so challenging, behaviorally speaking, was because of my parenting style. And that was really confusing to me because by the time Brig was 4, we would have had, 3 kids? No, 4 kids. We had Katie by then, I think. Yeah, because we had Katie when we moved. So I was the mother of 4 at the time, and the only child that I was struggling with was Brig. And it wasn't just a little bit of struggle. It's
obvious that the 3 other kids were just perfect.
Right, and he's just the scapegoat. We're just going to blame everything on Brig. Okay, so this is about scapegoating our son who turned 18 yesterday. Woohoo! So long story short, Brig has a diagnosis of pediatric onset schizophrenia. And so I went into behavioral health because, back 15 years ago when I was drowning in raising a behaviorally challenging child, I needed answers and nobody had answers because pediatric onset schizophrenia is incredibly super rare, incredibly rare. And we're going to talk a little bit about this moving forward, but I also had a tendency to exaggerate his symptoms a little bit. And so there was a lot of time of lost credibility as his mother where the doctors, they didn't know any better. They didn't know me. They didn't know my trauma history. And so I was exaggerating some of the severity of his symptoms. Well, the problem is when you exaggerate something that's already incredibly severe, it becomes unbelievable. I'm going to shift back to, squirrel, come back. Squirrel back to me, back to Sarah here. One of the things that I began to notice more so when I hit the master's level side of my counseling career was we began to identify symptoms, tendencies, characteristics of toxic environments, toxic cultures, toxic behaviors, toxic relationships. And one of the things that we studied was the cult-like nature of certain systems or certain religions. And of course, when Mormons hear that they're a cult, we all wig out, we're not a cult. And I hear what you're saying. In my master's program, I began to recognize that the culture of the church, of the Mormon church, was unfortunately very...
The mighty and resilient Merrimack River, carving through the communities of our great region. My name is Linda Lorden, proud president of Merrimack County Savings Bank. And like the river that serves as our namesake, we're a constant yet ever-changing presence. Because to us, it's bigger than banking. It's about powering communities and putting people first. It's about knowing where you came from and where you're going. That's Merrimack style. Visit us at themerrimack.com.
Culty. Alrighty, so in my master's program, I began to recognize that there were some really toxic patterns that were very Mormon-like. And so I spent probably the next, 8 years in the church believing and hanging on to the dogma and the practices and, we say dogma, maybe the doctrines and whatnot, feeling that those were good and those were perfect and that the culture was this really weird dynamic that we had somehow just developed out of the blue, which is a little immature of me to think that. But it took me about 8 years. And in that time, I served as the primary president. I served as young women's president. I served as early morning seminary teacher. And I served as, 3 times.
Oh,
I did,
3 times.
I did seminary, 3 times. So when you're in the military, you move all over the place. And when you move somewhere, and the bishop says, what callings have you had in the past? And you say, I taught early morning seminary. Seminary. You're going back to seminary. No, and then when you were the bishop, Mason, I taught gospel doctrine as well. And one of the things that I did in that teaching was I definitely taught the doctrines of the church, but I put a mental health spin on it to try and challenge some of these cultural things, and mostly hoping to help people. Like empathy training skills was a big one that I would put in, trying to teach people how to hold space and honor differing opinions and other worldviews and other interpretations. You know, you and I can talk about one thing that's happened in church history and come away with two completely different opinions of that. And so some of the things that I was trying to teach is how to hold space for that, how to kind of kill that toxic perfectionism, that really toxic judgment that goes on. And as I was on that journey, I also had to really unpack and process my own trauma, because it took a while to recognize that a lot of my exaggeration and difficulty with being just simply honest and some of these other struggles had to do with the fact that I had been systemically, chronically, emotionally abused. And it took a long time to discover that both of my parents are on the personality disorder spectrum, and that really had a negative impact on my life. So I had to grow up in order to really grow up and mature. Not grow up like you need to grow up, you're acting like a baby, but really more that I had to become somebody new.
And you had to be self-aware, right? You had to be able to figure out what was going on and where a lot of that came from. And
right. So the anatomy of my dysfunction is kind of what you're talking about. I had to kind of
like that anatomy word. That's a good word.
Getting into the anatomy of my dysfunction, and I really had to deal with it. I had to get to a place where I was more emotionally mature in order to face the challenges that were going on in my life. And I think that's a really common journey. I think most of us go through something similar to that. You know, as we get older, we get wiser, and whatnot. So anyway, as I was doing this, then the military moved our family. Well, we moved our family to Missouri. Let me clarify. We moved our family to Missouri with the promise and orders that were almost given and then withdrawn for Mason to join us.
Don't ever do that.
Yeah, don't trust the Army. We love them. Don't trust them. But I ended up moving to Missouri without you and spent 11 months without you, which would have been our third major separation in our marriage. I mean, we'd done some minor ones. I'll say major separation lasting 6 months or longer, and minor 6 months or less.
Then yes, it would be the third one. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Right? All right. So it was our third major separation. And during that time, Brig wasn't stable. Our daughter Abigail, who has not yet been formally diagnosed as autistic, thank you COVID, but we'll probably be getting that formal diagnosis here in the next year or so and whatnot. There was so much going on at home, and we moved into a ward that was not as accepting. Like, one of the things I love about military wards is there seems to be a lot more nuance and a lot more acceptance of
people from everywhere, right?
Right.
You have to kind of
cultures.
Meld and yeah. And you're not staying there. Most people are not. They're not staying there, or they chose to stay there because that's where they wanted to be. So yeah, there's a lot more room for nuance, a lot more room for different personalities, races, all kinds of stuff. We loved that part of being in the military because we just got exposed to so many different kinds of people, and it was a wonderful experience.
Right. So case in point, a luau in our non-military wards looked like...
in the middle of Texas.
Right. Looked like a huge potluck and people wearing Hawaiian shirts, but then a luau in our middle of Texas military ward looked like the dancing and the flames and the bonfire and the whole cooked pig and the people in Hawaiian get up. And I mean, it was...
Right,
Hawaiian.
We had some people who knew how to do it, absolutely.
Yeah, and I loved that because I had gone to Hawaii for my internship, for one of my practicums for my master's degree, and I got to experience that, you know, Hawaiian culture in Hawaii, and I absolutely loved our luau in Texas with all of the Hawaiians and Samoans and the Pacific Islanders as they came together, and like that was a real ward luau.
Right. Real
culture.
Yeah,
it was
real foray into a real culture that
I like
you
the
wouldn't
word
see otherwise.
foray.
Yeah, I don't even really know what it means, but
Maybe
I
you
think
need to
it's
look it
appropriate.
up.
I don't even know how to spell it.
All right, let me make this a clinical thing. I would say that the cultural, contextual environment, culturally contextual environment. We're going to play with these words, okay? Just get used to it.
Big words.
Big words, right? But the culture was there, the context was there. It was very more than single dimensional. That's what I'm trying to say. Is that there was a lot more context in that ward, and that differences were celebrated and enjoyed and learned about, and mostly they were non-threatening. And I loved that about our military wards. And when I got here to Missouri, it was like the ward was flat. We did not have that level of context. And between the toxic culture that I'd been struggling with for 8 years, being alone, kids being sick, and then moving into a place where I had learned how to depend on my Army community and that military church community, which is very different than church community without the military dynamic in there. And I had a complete nervous breakdown. And as I sat in the hospital, in the psych ward for a very prolonged period of time, there's not a lot to do on a psych ward. That's kind of boring. So you get to sit with your thoughts for a really long time. And so I put my introspective powers to work and really kind of mapped out what in my life needs to change. Because if I'm burned out like this, it means I'm not taking, or it did mean for me, that I was not taking care of myself in the way that I needed to in order to remain emotionally, mentally, and spiritually healthy. And every single thing that I could trace back that number one, that I could remove, I can't be like, oh, well, my kids are hard, so let's just get rid of them. Apparently that's frowned upon. Although if I tried that, I could spend a lot of time in the prison system and have lots of time for introspection.
Absolutely.
I could.
Absolutely.
No thanks. So anyway, as I kind of sat in that hospital, it was, everything came back to toxic culture of the church, trauma from my Mormon upbringing, trauma from being systemically abused as a child, and everything came back to the church. And so when I left the hospital, it was shortly after that I told you, Mason, hey, I don't really believe this. I haven't for a while. Here's a whole bunch of historical stuff to support that I'm not crazy, right? Because it's really difficult to come in and say, look at all of these cultural things, but I don't really have any hard evidence or source material to describe that culture and whatnot. So I gave you all of the historical stuff that I was like, yeah, I got a problem with this, right? And our plan when we had that discussion was that I was going to just kind of silently back out of the church, that I wasn't going to, I just wasn't going to go anymore. I just wanted to kind of separate myself. And you were sad. You were disappointed. I'll let you talk about that a little bit here in a second. But the thing that was really helpful for my plan was it was the middle of COVID. So because it was the middle of COVID, it was pretty easy to just disappear and nobody noticed. And we were still relatively new in the ward. And the ward the members of that ward are so set in their patterns of behavior. It was really easy to just kind of disappear in the background. And I stayed kind of that quiet person, not posting a lot. It took us, I want to say 6 to 8 months before we made that announcement that I had left the church to our family members, which didn't go over very well. And we'll talk about that at a future episode. But then things changed when the church excommunicated Natasha Helfer Parker. And again, I think that was still the middle of COVID. Was going on, and I remember being aware of that. I think I got introduced to who Natasha Helfer Parker was through Mark Osland, who's a good friend of ours. He served his mission in North Carolina, and we were one of the families that got to witness some of the struggles Mark was having, although he hadn't identified it as the church yet, to kind of get to know Mark a little bit. And So I learned about Mormon Stories podcast and Mormon Discussions podcast through Mark. I listened to Mark Oslin's Mormon Stories podcast, loved it, found community there in those podcasts, found, hey, I'm not alone in what I'm feeling there with them. And I'm very appreciative to all the work that John DeLynn does over at Mormon Stories and with his team. And then with Mormon Discussions, and especially Mormonism Live with Bill Reel and RFM, just absolutely loved it. Because if you want source material for what's going on, that is your go-to. And so I was introduced to what was going on for Natasha Helfer Parker through the Mormon Stories podcast. And when they excommunicated her for publicly speaking out about the toxic culture of sexuality within the church, and for her she was speaking out publicly, but she was speaking out from a scientific, evidence-based practices, best practices. I mean, she was teaching out loud on a larger scale the same exact things I was teaching to my clients in clinic. And when they exed her for being an ethical provider and following the licensing laws for her profession of her state, that was when I said, I can't be silent anymore. And I had my name.
All of them, all of your names.
Yeah, I got a lot of them. I had my name removed from the church for one, I didn't want to put my family through being excommunicated. And I knew that would be my eventual outcome because I'm not a silent person. And I think deciding in the beginning, hey, I'm just going to kind of bow out silently and not make waves, that was very inauthentic for me because I've never been a silent person. You're going to find I can talk. Hello, podcast.
Really? Yeah.
Yeah, and so since then, I have a book that is coming out. Right now, the working title is Trauma Bonded. That might change a little bit. I know, you never know. I got the list of what's coming, but my book is supposed to be released probably spring of 2023. And then I'm starting this podcast, Unpacking Mormonism. And in a couple months, we'll have the podcast Raising Crazy that'll be released. And then after that, we're going to have the podcast Conversations with a Schizophrenic be released. I'm opening up my services for life coaching to help those who are in faith transition. And then I will still run my private practice, Westbrook Counseling Services, and practice counseling there. So that's who I am. And Mason, I went way over my 5-minute time limit.
Holy cow, yeah.
I know. All right. So who are you? We're not going to talk about Sarah honoring her own boundary here.
I feel like I should be able to say, you know, everything about Sarah that you need to know, but that's just so not true. There's going to be so much more that comes up. Just a very sparkling personality, and she's got a lot of good education, and hopefully will be a huge benefit to the people who can listen to this podcast and grow from it. So why are you crunching up papers?
I have no idea.
Strictly against the rules.
I told you not to because it would get in the way of backup noise.
Right, yeah. So I'm going to have to call you out on all the things that you tell me not to do that you end up doing.
You know what? Please do, because that is so healthy. And one of the purposes of this podcast is to demonstrate that you can be called out and still have a really positive relationship. So yeah, call me out, Mason. I did not honor my own boundary or follow my own rules. So
we'll just see if I pay for that later.
Oh, that's not even. Okay, you are going to pay for it later.
Who is Mason? My name is Mason. I'm a junior, so I've always gone by my middle name, which is Mason. I'm a husband. I'm a father of 7, as you've just been told by Sarah so well. I'm a retired Army officer. I spent 7 years as an enlisted man. Made it to the rank of staff sergeant in the Army, and then crossed over to the dark side, as the enlisted people would say, and became an officer and eventually an anesthesia provider, and retired just recently.
Weeks ago.
Yeah, just recently. So excited about that. I'm the oldest of 6 siblings, and I have parents that are still married, which is maybe an oddity in our world today.
But a point of elevation in Mormon culture.
Absolutely.
Like that's a status symbol in Mormon culture. My parents are still married. It doesn't matter how dysfunctional their relationship is. They're still married, so they're going to heaven. Not that your parents' relationship is dysfunctional. I'll shut up. Sorry. Back to you, Mason. And
I grew up a very devout Mormon. I was the oldest of 6 siblings, and I served a mission. I've been a bishop, been lots of different callings, and loved it. I'm very much still active, maybe not as devout, but I still kind of consider myself as devout. Maybe the prophet wouldn't see me as devout, but in my mind and in my heart, I still am. At this moment in time, still kind of devout. My parents had their flaws. I'm going to pause you
really quick and say I absolutely love that. I love that you said that. You know, the prophet wouldn't consider me this, but I do. And I love that because what you're doing is you're modeling my identity is defined by me and nobody else. And I'm okay with that. Well, and I just wanted to point out how awesome you are because there used to be a time in your life where if the prophet didn't feel like Mason Westbrook was devout, that was problematic.
Sure, it meant that changes need to be made in my life. And I'm not saying that changes don't need to be made still, right? That's right. That's the case. I'm still very much about becoming a better person. But I feel like, at least for the moment, I'm in a very good place with God, with the Savior. Right. And I'm not even sure how I feel about all of that stuff right now. We'll probably unpack some of that coming around the corner because this is Unpacking Mormonism. But we'll get to that. My parents had their flaws, mostly in creating inadvertently an environment where sharing emotions and feeling emotions wasn't safe. I don't think they did that on purpose. Just that's the way they were raised, and they just didn't have the tools to do it differently. But they were great people. They were then. They still are. I still talk with them on a regular basis and appreciate the relationship that I have with them. I play guitar. I write music as just a hobby. I haven't written music in a long time, but that's still part of the goals and dreams there. I mentioned I do anesthesia. I'm a nurse anesthetist, and I love being able to take care of people and help them to not care about the fact that somebody's about to cut their body open and
yeah,
and just
I love
on.
Mason that you say one of my favorite things in the world is to, give people a medicine so that they don't care anymore.
Absolutely, right?
Yeah.
So the
anesthesia,
AN means no feeling. That's my job, is to make you not feel.
Wait, is that true?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, no feeling, yeah.
Oh, that's so fitting.
That's what it is, right? That's exactly what I do, is make you not feel, not care, and...
Well, and you came from a place where you have struggled with feelings, so I find that ironically hilarious. Keep going. I'm interrupting again.
Jim Gaffigan says that he would want to be an anesthesiologist so that just one day he could walk in and say, "Hi, I'm Dr. Gaffigan. I'm here to give you medicine so that you can't talk or move," and then some stranger's going to cut you open.
Right, and then you're going to wake up and you're not going to remember me
you're not gonna
at
care.
all.
That's right. You're not going to care. So I love doing that. Something important to this podcast, I am a forced learner.
Forced. I thought we said you weren't going to use that word.
You don't like that word,
but it's
really the best word there. It means that I usually have to be pushed into learning. That once I'm there, once I'm learning, or once I have learned something, I'm usually very grateful for that. Cue the last couple of years especially. But I usually have to get pushed into it. And it's not because I'm resistant to change so much, it's just that I'm content where I am. And
Are you sure you're not resistant to change?
Yes, I am. It's not well, maybe I am a little resistant to change.
Maybe you're subconsciously resistant, but you don't want to be.
It's more that what I'm trying to say is that I don't get forced into learning because I'm resistant to change.
Right.
It's because I'm just content where I am. And until you can demonstrate conclusively that something needs to be different, I'm not really going to do that. And
I really appreciate that, because when we were working on the outline, you had shared that you were going to say that. And I was like, I just don't like that word forced. Could you maybe find one that fits better? And you found the one that
was no.
Right, you found the one that fit you best. But I appreciate that quantifying of what that means or what that looks like for you. Because for me, again, input traumatic history and systemic abuse, force feels triggering for me. And that's my experience.
Sure.
Force for you feels the way you just defined it. And I think the way that you defined it is, very accurate for yourself. So thank you for quantifying.
Yeah, you bet. Thank you for pointing that out, because I'm also not a very self-aware person. I've had to really work on that, and I'm only a little bit better at it.
You're more than a little bit. You're doing much better than you give yourself credit for.
I also tend to be less forgiving of myself. Some of that comes from the church. Some of that just comes from, I don't even really know exactly where it all comes from. But I'm not very self-aware.
I'm struggling with interrupting you, but I am going to interrupt right now. You said I struggle with forgiving myself. I want to put in, you do not struggle with forgiving others.
Right.
So you're really good at forgiving other people, which I also think comes from your upbringing in the church as well.
It does.
But that you struggle with forgiving yourself, which is really interesting.
It does. And I'll actually explain that, because I think that that's going to be helpful down the road as we're talking, is that I can see my reasons, right? Like if I've screwed something up, I can see my reasons and I have my expectations for myself. Oh man, I should not have done that. And we don't use the word should in our house, but I just used it anyway. Sarah will say hell and I'll say should, and we'll just be sinners all around.
Frankly, your word's worse than mine.
In your opinion, yes.
True.
And sometimes you're probably correct. But anyway,
I'm always correct.
So anyway, I can see my reasons. I can see where I'm at. I can see what I want from myself, but I try to recognize that I cannot see your reasons. I cannot see where you're at in your life. I can't see what caused you to do this, that, or the other. And while I'm certainly not perfect at it, I do try to just go, I don't know where they are, and I'm not going to judge them for where they are, but I'm going to judge myself for where I am. And so I've had to work on that. Like I try not to judge myself, and as perspectives about things have changed, I've been able to do better at that. So that's my self-aware journey there.
So I'd like to add though to that you said, I'm not very, what did you say? Self-reflective?
Self-aware.
Mm-hmm. But I think you are self-aware, just not self-aware emotionally. Because what you just described is, I get my journey, I get my reasons. So you have that awareness. I'm going to call that like maybe cognitive awareness. Like you understand why you did what you did. But what you're describing and what I know of you is that where you struggle with awareness is the value of your emotional responses, how you feel about things, and how that emotional piece of you is important and valuable to your interpretation of your own life.
Right. Does anybody else feel like I just got therapized?
You did just get therapized.
Okay, good. All right. It's not me. Oh,
hang on. Was it effective and helpful?
That's irrelevant. I just got therapized. That was against my will. I did not sign a consent form for that.
Honey, you said for better or worse. Wait, that's not what they say in the temple. You said yes, so now you're screwed. So really quickly, I'm gonna do a disclosure really quick. Because we did not do that yet. So yes,
you're gonna interrupt my story for disclosure.
You know what? I am working on not interrupting people as much, and I am getting a D-.
Can you do it in that undertone, really fast length, like where they do with all the side effects of the medicines at the bottom of the story?
Not on this one, no. But that would be awesome. All right.
Interrupt my story. Do your disclosure.
I know. So disclosure, yes, I am a licensed professional counselor. I hold a license in more than one state. And I want to make sure that I make it clear. Yes, I'm going to offer therapeutic insight is what I would call it, what just happened in this podcast. But I want to caution the listeners. What I am sharing is an introduction to skills. It's an introduction to theory. It's ideas. Some of it based in research and science, some of it personal, some of it just from my own professional experience. But none of this replaces the advice or counsel you receive from your own personal licensed physician or licensed counselor. Really, what this podcast is going to do is introduce you to all of these things, maybe get you thinking on some things. And then I encourage you to go to your own personal provider so that that individual can help you adapt the things that you're learning so that it's individualized for your life journey and for your betterment. I recommend a licensed provider simply because there's a very high level of education and training that goes with that, but really somebody that you feel comfortable with. But I cannot do that in a podcast. So everything that we talk about, and yes, when I offer that therapeutic insight or ask those introspective questions, that has become a part of who I, Sarah Westbrook, am, for better or worse.
Mostly better.
Please recognize that it's for educational purposes only.
So from a church perspective, whatever religion you might be in, because I recognize a lot of people listening to this are probably Mormons.
Right. Unpacking Mormonism
we're hoping,
and other religious
trauma. We're hoping
trauma.
to get other people involved too, because there are lots of high demand religions out there that take a lot from people and give a lot to people, right? Mormonism absolutely gives a lot to people, but it also takes. But to take a lesson from that, when you're in a Sunday school lesson, the really great Sunday school teachers expose you to a topic.
Yes.
They don't teach you faith or whatever, baptism, or they don't teach that topic to you. The really good ones, they expose you to some ideas about faith or whatever. And in the interest of having you then go home and study it for yourself, take some time in your, my 30-minute, 45-minute lesson is not going to give you the personal insight that you need to really change your perspective on something.
Right.
So that this podcast is kind of like that. It's like, we want to expose you to some ideas that can change your perspective, change the way that you see things, and then go out and do something about it.
And I love that. And I feel like you're really good at that. I feel like you've demonstrated that. You've been a beloved gospel doctrine teacher. I feel like for the most part, you were a beloved bishop. I feel like you did a really good job in that calling. And I love that. And I would say, what you're talking about in Mormon lingo is, here's your 30 to 45 minute gospel doctrine or Sunday school lesson. Go home, study it out, pray about it, and gain your own personal revelation for how you're going to use that information in your own life. That would be that church lingo. And then outside of the church lingo, the way that Sarah interprets the exact same thing would be, I'm going to think about it. I might even use the word ponder. I'm going to sit with it. I'm going to digest it a little bit. And I'm going to utilize some introspection and determine what parts held significant value for me. Where can I take that information and become more my authentic self because it really aligns with me? And also, what pieces am I going to leave behind? I remember, goodness, it was a general conference talk. I don't remember who it was by, that they compared the Book of Mormon to a buffet, and they said the Book of Mormon or the Gospel of Jesus Christ is not a buffet. It's you have to take it all. And I completely disagree with that. I would say that any information that comes in, suck it in, take it in, and then filter what you want to keep because it fits who you are and leave the rest. And I would say do that with this podcast. Take the things that really resonate with you, and it is okay if you ignore the rest, unless it's me. Don't ignore me. But if it's Mason, you can ignore him a little bit.
Oh, thanks. I mean, in interest of full disclosure, I am not an LPC, right? I don't have a therapy license.
No, you like to shut people up rather than get them to talk.
Wow. That hurts.
Am I wrong?
So, coming back to my story, who I am, I'm still an active member. And the reason I bring that particularly up is because I don't agree that the gospel is not a buffet, right? I think that there are perspectives to look at. I think that we can oftentimes become very overwhelmed by what a high demand religion asks of us.
Right. Absolutely.
And then we either hurt ourselves or we hurt the people around us because we're trying to do too much. So I don't think that the gospel or the church is a buffet. Like, I don't think you can just pick or choose what is true, what isn't true, what is relevant, what isn't relevant. However, in your life, some things have to be put aside. They're not as relevant for you now. Like, we talk about church history or not family history all the time, right? And going and preparing names for the temple or whatever. I've done very little of that in my life. I have 7 children. I've been deployed. I've been in the military, right? There just hasn't been what I would consider good opportunities for that.
So what I hear you saying is family history did not trump studying for your board exams in anesthesia school?
Right. For some reason, I couldn't. And I never felt...
You're going to hell for that.
I never felt guilty about that, right? Because there's some things in your life. And that's kind of... I think most people kind of feel that way about family history, is that I don't feel guilty about that because I just can't do it.
Right.
But there are things in our lives, home teaching, visiting teaching, which are now ministering, yeah. Where people oftentimes will feel guilty because they're not being as involved or doing those things. And I want us to continually improve and become the person we want to be. Like, if you want to be a great minister, then absolutely work on that. Make that a priority in your life, but don't feel guilty as you fail at it, because we all will. So,
right.
So still an active member. The church works for me. I'm still trying to figure out how to rectify all this information that I have, historical stuff and things like that. But it still works for me. Like I said, resistant to change. So maybe I'm just not ready for... Maybe I'm just not ready for something else because it still works for me.
Right.
So we'll see there. And mostly the last couple of years have been painful. They've been difficult times, partly because of what you've gone through, partly because of how I've responded to that, partly because we were separated for a year, a lot because I've been made aware of the fact that I was not emotionally available for you.
Right.
And that was difficult for me because I have always tried to be very much an active part in our marriage. And I wasn't emotionally. So I've been aware of that, and it's been painful. But I'm hoping that this podcast will help me and help other people as we go through trying to unpack things.
Well, and you've definitely improved. I mean, recognition, and then you've definitely taken the steps to
that's important.
Improve, which I think is great. So is there anything else you feel?
For my story, I'm done. That's it. That's all you have to
That's
know
all there
about
is about
me.
you?
That is all there is to know.
Okay, so the rest of Mason's presence on these podcasts moving forward will just be because you already know everything you need to know about him.
I'm hoping I can present a little bit more important information. But why don't we move on, since you're chattering over there, and let's finish this up before it becomes so painful that people can't finish it, because I was like, oh my gosh, how long is that? Woo.
So I think the next question, or really the thing that we wanted to address, is who are we as a couple?
Oh, and good. I have that written down.
Okay, well, go ahead.
All right. So we're a partnership.
Yes, we are a
partnership.
Mm-hmm.
As actually I was just kind of talking about there towards the end.
Yeah.
We are a mixed faith family. That's been a huge transition, but it's been a good one for the most part.
And I love that, because when you say mixed faith family, a lot of times we tend to focus on we're a mixed faith marriage, but our entire family, like our children, are exploring.
Everybody's struggling with the whole change, and they're exploring.
Struggling or adjusting, because I wouldn't say the kids are in struggle. I mean, some of them are, but some of them are not.
That's why I said struggling.
Okay.
Some of them are.
Some of them are struggling, some of them are not.
But it's an adjustment, right? Either way.
Right.
So struggling or not struggling, it's an adjustment, because our whole world which is a misnomer.
Our religious identity has crumbled.
It's a misnomer to say our whole world, but for anyone who's in a high demand religion, you recognize that your world to some degree revolves around that religion.
Right.
So when there's a significant change in the way that you either live or participate in that religion, your whole world feels like it's changing. So we're a mixed faith family. And then the last thing I wrote down here is that we are people who seek to understand and believe each person's experiences. And I think that's kind of what this is about, is to make a place to not just hear someone's experience, but as you were mentioning earlier with Brene Brown, believing their experience.
Right.
Recognizing that your experience sounds kind of, I don't know, I just don't get it. But I'm willing to make the place that says your experience is true for you. It is what you believe. It is who you think you are. And I need to make a place for that in order to be able to have a relationship with you.
Well, and I love, Brene Brown focuses on belonging and connection and vulnerability and shame and those types of things. But one of the things that you and I were talking about was her quote, and this is very loosely done, is that if we're going to connect with somebody, we have to believe their story. If we walk in not believing that their story felt the way that they're describing it, we get stuck. We cannot establish healthy connections with people. We cannot foster that belonging environment if we are invalidating and judging somebody's experiences. And that's absolutely something I learned through Brene Brown. It was her... what was the Audible book, Mason? I'm totally drawing a blank.
Power of Vulnerability.
Yeah, The Power of Vulnerability, available on Audible. I believe it's now available on other places, but that's where I got mine. It's like a little pinkish red box with like a white, I think it's a dove flying away. And it's The Power of Vulnerability by Brene Brown. It's about 6.5 hours of pure awesomeness. It is, to this day, still my absolute favorite Brene Brown product. It's the one that I've listened to over and over again. So yeah, we'll leave we'll leave a link to that in the show notes, because there's just so many gold nuggets in that really give us keys and information on how to accomplish this. I would say, Mason, the thing that didn't make it to your list there of who are we, we're also co-parenting. And yes, we're married. And I think a lot of times people utilize the term co-parent or partnership for individuals who are not legally married. And I would say that, yes, we are married. We have a little certificate, and we, did our thing over the altar in the Mormon temple there. So yes, we are married, but that being married and a partner and co-parents and embracing the mixed faith dynamic of our family, that is who we are. And I would say, our next question for you is, so why on earth do we want to listen to Unpacking Mormonism? Like, what's in this for me?
Finally, we got to the real question.
I know we're like 45, 50 minutes in and we're getting to this. That's okay. I feel it's important that people know a little bit about who we are in order to feel safe in their listening experience. When I talk about safety, I'm talking about emotional, spiritual, mental safety here. And so I want to say that Unpacking Mormonism and other religious trauma. Oh, you found what?
It took me a while, but I found the quote from Brene Brown. It says, in order to empathize with someone's experience, you must be willing to believe them as they see it and not how you imagine their experience to be.
Oh, I love it. It's one of my favorite quotes.
Do
you have a source material, or is that like some fancy meme?
I have a Google search for Brene Brown memes. That's where it is.
Does it say in that Google search like where it was originally published? Because if it does, we definitely want to give Brene creds for that and put it in the show notes. It doesn't on here. No. It doesn't on there. It
just does say it's from Brene Brown. That's all.
Awesome. Yeah, I love that. It's one of my favorite quotes from Brene Brown, which I loosely quote people all the time.
Nothing wrong with that, as long as you give them the credit, right?
Right. That was Brene Brown. You rock. You changed my entire world.
Both of us.
Yes, and Brene is my best friend, y'all, and she's never met me. She has no idea who I am. But her presence,
number one creepy fan.
I know I'm creepy, but her presence in my life and my journey of healing and growth was just so powerful that, yes, I consider her one of my best friends. I consider her a colleague, and we've never met. Brene, hint, hint, if you ever hear this, I'm creepy and I want to meet you.
Hashtag Brene.
Hashtag Brene Brown. Okay, so one of the things that this podcast, what we're trying to do here is create a safe space for open discussion about the challenges of high demand religion, religious trauma, and specific to the Mormon church. And the reason it's specific to the Mormon church is because we were both born and raised Mormon, and that's kind of where my experiential expertise lies. And so we really want to make this an open place for discussion. We want to make this podcast a place where we really challenge polarized thinking, so that we can foster community, so that we can model how to talk to people about having differences in beliefs and values and goals and still love them and honor their humanity and engage with them on a regular basis. Like, you can be Mormon and have non-Mormon friends and have a blast together, and it doesn't need to be this competition thing. So I really want to focus on that. I want to be able to demonstrate that we can do this. And I'm going to be bringing guests on. I've got a whole list of guests that are going to come on and talk about
Brene Brown.
Unfortunately, Brene Brown is not on my schedule yet. Hint, hint. That's so terrible. Not terrible. That's exciting. Hopefully, that would be awesome. Like, that is a dream come true. That would be a dream come true.
Yeah,
for
you
me.
better save that to your last episode.
Well, and
because
then
after that, you'll have been fulfilled. There'll be nothing left to do.
Well, and then I would just be so afraid of being too creepy. Idol worship. Okay. So anyway, one of the biggest losses that I've found in faith transition is losing your community. You know, we talk about that shunning that happens, and I want to hold space for my Mormon friends who say, "Oh no, that doesn't happen. We don't treat people differently when they're not Mormon." And I'm here to tell you from my experience, y'all suck at assimilation when people disagree with you. And I want for us as a community to come together and really challenge that. I want to be able to have this be a place where we can model that. My slogan on all of my businesses is learn, grow, become. That sets my intention for my professional life. It sets my intention for my book. It's setting my intention for these podcasts, is that I want for people to be able to come here, learn stuff, all kinds of different things, take what resonates from them so that they can grow and challenge themselves and then become who they are as an expression of their most authentic self.
We're going to come with some specific ideas, some specific topics. But again, like any great lesson, you can take that a lot of different ways. So yeah, don't let our intention quarantine your learning. Like, you learn what you can learn from this. Yeah. I mean, there's probably other words that you could put in there, but maybe limit. I
like that. Let's play with it a little bit.
Maybe just limit. Like, don't let our intention limit your learning. You know, don't just say, well, they just talked about this, so I can't learn anything else from that. Take what you can learn from this and run with it.
And learn, grow, become is Sarah's intention. If you would like to borrow it or take it and make it your own, absolutely go for it. Now, you can't take my, copyrighted on my stuff, but the words are not mine. So utilize those and become who you are.
So my slogan must be like, learn, have fun, and laugh.
Sure. I thought your slogan was, do what Sarah says while laughing.
No, that's my mantra.
That's awesome. Okay. Gold star to you. I need to go get it from my office. I normally hand my clients a gold star.
You can wait till this is over. It's all good.
Yeah, when my When my clients in sessions say something awesome like that, I literally have a gold star trophy. I'm going to bring that in here so I can huck it at your head when you say awesome stuff like that. All right. So who are we? What are we? We want to be a safe place where we can share stories and introduce skills that you can work through and learn from to become your own authentic self. We want to model how to hold space for differing views. We want to be able to demonstrate by example how to do this, utilizing evidence-based practices. And, we're going to pull in information from like the Gottmans and things from my counseling theory and practice to do that. And I want us to be able to value individual humanity. I want this place to be some place where you can come and listen, hear stories and experiences that resonate with you, and walk away knowing that you as a human, no matter where you are in your struggle, that you have value, that you're on a journey, and that no destination is permanent. As long as your heart is beating and you're breathing, nothing's permanent. We want you to be able to embrace that fluidity in our lives, and let you know that, so obviously, this might be mean, Mason. If this sounds mean, kick me in the shins or something. But I would say that
I can't kick you in the shins.
I did that on purpose.
I have a pen. I can throw it.
You can throw. So you
Go
throw
ahead.
pens. I throw trophies.
Say
Done.
It. Say it.
So
with the pen.
I would say that because of my experiences in education, I am more emotionally mature than you, because you're still new on that journey, as you said before. Stop. Are you feeling sad? You're feeling sad. Aww.
I can't argue with that. That's absolutely true.
But that doesn't make me better or elevated over you. And I want to be able to model that just because one person is in a different place on their journey does not mean that they're better than somebody else. And I want us to experience this journey together. And I want this to be a place where you're not alone in that.
It makes that tool more effective in your belt, right?
Right.
Because you understand your emotions, you understand other people's emotions. That tool is a strong tool. That's Mjolnir right there. I mean, that's Thor's hammer. It's a very impressive tool for you.
Right.
Whereas for me, it's like a little stick that maybe one day I'll fashion into a hammer, right? But yeah, absolutely. We want you to feel like if you were sitting in this office with us, you could share your stories of your deep trauma and deep struggles and your powerful happiness too, right? We want you to be able to feel like you could share any of those stories here and not receive judgment, receive empathy, receive what you need.
Unconditional acceptance and love.
Right, what you need from sharing that story, right? People don't share stories for no reasons. We want you to be able to feel like you could share those stories and get what you need from us. And of course, from a podcast, it's a little bit harder to do because you're not right here.
Right.
But that's what we want to communicate is that.
And maybe help you identify people exist in the world that can hold space for you no matter where you are.
And everyone knows one.
And if you can say, hey, I really like how Unpacking Mormonism demonstrated this for me, I want to look for that in a close relationship in my own community.
Right.
I like that.
Something that just came to mind, we watched Dear Evan Hansen the other night, right? And
that's a hard movie. I love it.
When his video of him trying to at the memorial, right? His video goes like viral. Or whatever, right? If you take the time to look at some of the comments, it's everybody grabbing onto that video in a different way. Some of them are like, "Oh, I wish I'd have known you," and some of them are, "That really helped me," and some of them are, "I have a friend like that, and now I've reached out to them." Right? Everybody gets something different from that video. But everybody learned something that was powerful in their life. And that's kind of where we're at, right? You're like, yeah. And every one of these podcasts may not be valuable to you, but we hope that there will be something valuable from each of these podcasts that can bless people's lives and help them move to becoming the authentic person they want to be that fits in line with their values and who they are.
I love that. Thank you, Mason. I really love how you added that scene from Dear Evan Hansen to demonstrate that one video can impact so many people in such different ways, and that every single way that it impacts them differently, for good or for bad, is okay. And that as we work to understand that, we can really connect as human kind. Yeah. The other thing that you and I had talked about, that, what is this podcast, is I want to be able to teach people how to identify trauma, identify when they're victims of trauma, and specifically religious trauma, but also trauma in general, and then to understand how trauma changes our brain and informs our worldview, how it affects our daily behaviors, our beliefs, our patterns, our relationships, our interactions in all areas of life, so that we can learn how to shift and not allow that traumatic impact carry as much of a burden on us. And one of the things, Mason, that you said in our planning meeting before that I want to share, I'm taking your words because I don't think you wrote it down, but I totally did, is that we want to be a resource where you can take all of the information that's out there and learn ways to implement it and affect change in your own life.
Right. We both listened to a whole bunch of Mormon stories, Mormonism Live, those kind of things, and of course, General Conference. Right. You can listen to things on both sides of each story, but what do you do with it then? Right. For some people, it just says, well, that's when my shelf broke, and then I was left just going, what now? Right. Well, we would like to help to fill in that gap of what now,
what to do with all
this.
This.
Where do I go with that? Like, if your shelf breaks, but you still really want to be a member of the church, well, maybe some of these tools will help you. If your shelf breaks and you're like, I don't ever want to talk to that, I don't ever want to step inside that building again, well, this stuff can help. We want you to be able to take that stuff and go, what now? Oh, I know what now. Right. Okay, I heard something just the other night, and that's what I want to do. Yeah. So
absolutely. So when you talk about, I've listened to all these things, we talked a little bit earlier about like how John DeLynn and Mormon Stories and Bill Reel and RFM over at Mormon Discussions really have played a strong, important role in our life. So I'm going to say what we are not. We are not a duplicate of those other programs, because they hold their space and they have their purpose. So our goal is, we'll talk about some of those historical difficulties, but then we're going to refer you to Mormonism Live or Mormon Discussions or Mormon Stories or there's so many out there. If we've heard one that kind of resonates with us for what we're talking about, we're going to refer you over to them so that you can listen to that, because there's no point for me, nor would I enjoy it, if I'm giving you all of the source material for the challenging historical stuff of the church. Right. Now, Bill Reel and RFM have done a phenomenal job of doing that. And so we'll be referring you and then linking some of their stuff in here. We are not here to recreate or reinvent what's already out there and working well. When we have guests in, we're going to hear a little bit of their story. Like John DeLynn is excellent at doing those deep dives and those like 7,000-hour podcasts. Right. We will not be doing that because we have 7 children, 6 of them still living at home, but also because that's John DeLynn's wheelhouse.
Yeah. And he does a great job. We're not here to duplicate that.
However, when we say, hey, this person that came on, they said this, we're going to refer you, go listen to that, and we're going to take this one little thread. So we're going to be kind of a landing place where we can point you in certain directions to find that source material, but we are not specifically going to cover that
not at all.
Source material. The other thing that I think it was that we had said was really important, and we came up with an example that we wanted to share today, is that our goal is to not or never, I can't say that we never will, because we're human and we're going to F it up on occasion. Okay. But we want to be able to demonstrate how you can identify toxic patterns of behaviors, that we can talk about differences in belief systems or differences of opinion without attacking an individual's character. We want to be a safe place where you can disagree without having your humanity or your character attacked. And so one of the examples that we talked about.
And before you go to the example, there's a reason for that, right?
Right.
And for me, and maybe there's multiple reasons, I expect that there are, but for me in particular, when someone starts to attack character, and this happens on both sides of every argument, right? There's people in the church that do it, there's people outside of the church that do it.
Absolutely.
And any particular situation. But the main reason for me that it matters is because when you start to attack someone's character, it's because you're trying to stop the conversation.
Right. You're trying to silence them.
You're trying to silence that person, right? If you can say, yeah, well, you sleep around, so obviously your opinion on this subject doesn't matter.
Right.
Then you've shut up the conversation instead of taking value from what they have to say.
Right.
And so that's what we don't ever want to be in, that situation where we're trying to shut up the conversation. We may not agree with you. We may say, hey, it's time to move on from this idea.
We're not going to silence.
But we're not going to silence you and say, you're a schmuck because you believe that, right? That's not the case.
And I'm going to say this before we get into our example. We are not perfect. And if you, I'm perfect, but you're not, right? Okay, so we are not perfect. And so if you feel that we have messed up, we also want to be a safe place where you can, email or text or call and communicate with us so that we can course correct, because we too are still on a journey and whatnot. And so having said that, if you want to email the Unpacking Mormonism and Other Religious Trauma,
it'll be in the show notes.
It will be in the show notes, but if you would like to email us, you will be emailing the parent company's email address, which is daisygirlcommunications@gmail.com. Again, there will be a link in the show notes. The phone number, Mason, I did not get the phone number. I wrote down that I needed to share the phone number, and it's not here.
Put it in the show notes.
I'll put the phone number in the show notes, and I'll make sure that we share that phone number live. Yes, I have a phone number. I don't know it. Thank you, modern day technology. I don't even know my own mother's phone number, but I do remember that my childhood phone number, I had two of them in Snowflake, was 928-536-2225 or 928-536-4424. I remember those phone numbers when I'm 4424 when I am like 90 and have Alzheimer's. I will remember my childhood phone numbers, but I am here to tell you I cannot even remember the phone number for my own business without it being sitting right in front of me.
Squirrel.
Ta-da! Squirrel. Yes, Sarah has a squirrel. We'll talk about Sarah's inner squirrel at a future episode. So yeah, we want to not attack somebody's character. And so our example of this that we gave is Russell M. Nelson, so prophet and president of the Mormon Church, told a story about a plane plunging to its death. Now, for the source material, we are going to refer you to Mormonism Live, episode 033. This is President Nelson's flight of death. So if you are curious as to what story we are talking about, or you want the source material and the research and the data, hit up Mormonism Live, episode 033, President Nelson's flight of death. Now, the synopsis of that story is, and I remember they made a Mormon Messages video about it. So President Nelson's like flying in an airplane. If you could see me, you'd see my arms are out like a little airplane, like I'm teaching little kids here.
So cute.
Aw, thanks. And an engine blows and the whole wing catches on fire and the plane is like spiraling out of control, going to death. And at the very last minute, the captain does something miraculous.
The very last minute.
I think he actually said in the last minute or whatever.
Anyway.
Pulls out of a hymn.
All the details of the story are
Sarah
not
exaggerating right now? I might be.
Well,
all right.
And not so much exaggerating as that the story had, and this is the whole point, right? The story had a different impact on you than it did on me.
Right.
And part of it is your struggle with. Go ahead.
I'm gonna pause you there, babe. So let me finish my thing. So in the moments before hitting the ground and crashing to their death, the captain does something miraculous. They pull the plane out of its tailspin nosedive, land in a field, and it's this miraculous thing. And President Nelson talks about how he was calm and ready to meet his savior, and the poor, unfortunate, simple-minded woman next to him was having a full-blown panic attack. Again, source material, Mormonism Live, episode 033.
Make of it what you will.
Right, make of it what you will. This is how I want to demonstrate not attacking Russell M. Nelson. If I came out and said, Russell M. Nelson is a bold-faced liar and cannot be trusted, I'm attacking his character. Unpacking Mormonism's goal is to not do that. However, I can take the observable patterns and run that through my internal filter, and Sarah Westbrook can say, I grew up in a home. So this is what Mason, what you were getting at before I so rudely gave you the timeout signal and shut you up there.
Don't get ahead of the story, right?
Right, don't get ahead of the story. So for Sarah Westbrook, I grew up in a home where if you didn't exaggerate, you were not heard. So in my culture, in my own home environment, that once again was very abusive, if I wanted my parents to pay attention to me, there was an element of exaggeration. And then I got punished for it. And subsequently, because of that pattern from the time I was itty bitty, it took me, I'm going to say, into my late 20s and early 30s before I had really mastered the art of calling out myself when I was exaggerating to change the outcome of a story. I had to be really careful with what I was saying to doctors in order to get care for Brig. So when somebody exaggerates their story and they don't own it as part of the story, like exaggerating and embellishing is a beautiful thing to create more life in a story. But when you're presenting that exaggeration as factual for the story, in the way that I feel President Nelson did in this story on multiple occasions, that's a huge trigger for me because I get accused of doing that and then I get punished. And then my experience is that people shame me. And then I have to fight my own, as Brene Brown would say, my own shame gremlins in order to deal with that. And so when I discovered that the evidence presented, the evidence that we have about this incident on the plane does not match the story that President Nelson presented as factual truth, I, Sarah Westbrook, do not feel that I can trust Russell M. Nelson to be an honest man. Now I'm going to turn this same story over to you, Mason. What was your take on this story?
My take, I think, is what was intended by the story, but that's again just the way I see it. The idea was that faced with difficult or scary situations, in this case, the what was presumed to be a very possible death, we want to be prepared for that. Like I want to be able to be calm on the plane and just go, you know what, I'm okay. I'm happy with where I am. You know, maybe I'm not happy about death. My fear of death is not about death itself, but about what's going to happen to my family if I die.
Right.
But I want to be in that place where I can be calm. I can recognize that God has me no matter the outcome of the situation. And so, and again, you know, the triggers, the things in that story that are triggering for you are not triggering for me, but they're triggering for a lot of people, right? Mm-hmm. A lot of people are having an issue with this story and some of the other stories that have been told in the past. And so I recognize that as well, too. Like, right. I get why it's disturbing. It makes sense to me. Right. And for me, I prefer and have chosen to see it from the perspective of what I believe the intent was. That
it was a good story to drive home a spiritual lesson of, if I'm doing the best I can and my affairs are in order, I have no reason to panic in the face of death.
Right.
That's what you got from the story.
Right, yeah.
And for me, I don't feel that Russell M. Nelson is credible or trustworthy.
Right. Two very different outcomes
very
from a story.
Different, right. And
but
I think
both
that,
relevant.
yes, and both have value.
Right. Absolutely.
Absolutely. But if you or I were to then fight over, does the prophet lie? I'm going to say Russell M. Nelson tells lies because he's a human. Does that make him a true or a false prophet? Unpacking Mormonism isn't here to decipher what that is.
Right.
Rather, we want to be able to hold space for Sarah, this is a problem. In Sarah's view of a prophet of what claims to be the only true church on the planet, this is extremely problematic for Sarah and for a lot of people. And that's normal and it's healthy and it's okay and it makes sense.
And it's a significant problem.
And for me, absolutely. It is if you're not getting
it's
this
not
from
just a little problem, it's a significant problem.
Right.
And that's okay.
Right. If you're not getting from my tone of voice that this is a significant problem from Sarah, let me clarify. This is a big deal. Because for me, in my worldview, my trauma brain, Russell M. Nelson is allowed to exaggerate and he's glorified as this prophet and wonderful being. But when Sarah embellishes her story just a little bit, she's a liar, she's a terrible mother, and I get all these messages that come, and my experience has been those messages are not internal. These are not messages in Sarah's head of, I'm a bad mom. These are messages that have been told to me by my parents.
Right.
Several members of your family have been incredibly cruel in their criticism when I've exaggerated, and yet President Nelson gets away with it. So for me, this story is a huge trauma trigger. And for you, this story is an inspiration. And Unpacking Mormonism's goal is to say, that's okay on both sides. We want to challenge polarized thinking and make allowance for you can have different interpretations and both have value. Lastly, did you have something you wanted to say?
Also, like I want to recognize that polarized thinking is kind of even what you just stated there, right? It's triggering for you, it's inspiring for me, but there's a middle ground there. It's still triggering for me too, right? I still have a problem with the fact that stories are not told in an accurate fashion.
Right.
They're just not as triggering for me. Like I've had to kind of to deal with it. It was something I was kind of able to just compartmentalize for me, and for you weren't. It took you completely out of that situation. And so it's okay to be somewhere in the middle. It's okay to be inspired by the story, but also recognize that there's some big issues
it's problematic
with how this goes. Yeah. So
absolutely. And Unpacking Mormonism, we want to be a place where we're not attacking character.
Right. That's the big deal right there.
Right.
So we're not going to attack character.
And if you, our listener, feel like we are failing at that goal, we invite
please let us
you.
know. Yeah.
Call us out on it. We want to be able to process that.
We want to be the safe place, right?
Absolutely.
And we can't be a safe place if we are doing things we say we're not going to do. So please, let us know.
Right. And then our final point for today on what Unpacking Mormonism and Other Religious Trauma is not. We are not here to encourage you to leave the Mormon church or to stay in the Mormon church. We are not here to tell anybody what they need to do with their life. Rather, we want to be a guide. We want to be a safe place for you to listen and explore and have your own introspection and figure out what's best for you, and then help you navigate your life in whatever direction you go without judgment from us. So we will also, again, if there's a listener out there that says, hey, we just feel like Sarah is telling everybody, run away from the Mormon church because they're horrible, call us out on that. For me, Sarah Westbrook, leaving the Mormon church was vital to my health. I literally had to leave Mormonism to live. And I chose to live because I have children. And I know what suicide does to surviving children. And I had to leave Mormonism to live for my kids. For me, it was that intense. It was that dramatic. Right. For Mason, at this point in his life, staying in the church feels the safest, the most comfortable, and he finds value there. We want to be a safe place where you can be 100% out, 100% in, or somewhere in the middle, and know that it's okay. We want to be able to foster that community here at Unpacking Mormonism.
And still be able to listen, right? In or out of the church, we want you to be able to listen and grow and come to understand. What I wrote down for that one is that we want you to be informed, right? If you decide you want to stay in the Mormon church, that's great.
Wonderful.
If that works for you, that's fine.
Right.
But be an informed member of the church. Don't be ignorant of some of the things that are really hard for people. If they're not hard for you, that's fine.
Right.
But please recognize that they're hard for other people. Some of them so hard that they can't be a part of this organization anymore. And we cannot be empathetic and be unconditionally loving people like the Savior does.
Right.
Without
like the doctrines
understanding.
of the church teaches and encourages you to be.
Right.
In order to achieve that.
Right. Absolutely. Right. And nothing is more important to this church than the doctrines that the Savior espoused and the life that he lived. He is the exemplar, according to Mormonism. He is the exemplar. And so we want you to be informed members. We want you to know about this and that and
Right.
those things and those things. And if you're able to compartmentalize them and still be a part of the church, great. We are not here to affect your testimony one way or the other. We are here to help inform people and help them to know, where do I go from here?
And as part of that, I want to make it clear, we will advocate to do no harm. So we will be challenging some of the systemic
Oh, absolutely.
toxicity
If you
of the
expect
culture.
to not get challenged.
Right. You're going to get challenged.
Right.
And I will absolutely, to my dying day, advocate to end the abuse that goes on in this system. But ending the abuse and leaving your religious world and your religious culture, totally different things. If I'm here to say, run away from Mormonism, I am doing harm. And so we want to hold space for wherever you are on your journey and encourage and advocate. Do no harm. Live your best life. Be your authentic self. And join us at Unpacking Mormonism and Other Religious Traumas so that you can explore what all of this means for you. Unpacking Mormonism and Other Religious Trauma is hosted by Sarah and Mason Westbrook, produced by Alex Vidalis and Daisy Girl Communications, music by Lorenzo Emanuel.